Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We've got a very special guest, Matt Bilinsky. You're an attorney. You do a lot of stuff. You've worked in startups, little politics. Give our for those of in our audience that haven't met you yet, give us a little brief on who you are.
No doubt. So I am an attorney here in Los Angeles, focusing mostly on media and technology and startups, but just general, business generally. As a company called Pluto TV, that's somewhat a more prominent company I was involved in. That was a streaming service sold to Viacom in 2019 for $340 million. So a lot of the stuff I do is along those lines. Also pretty active as a commentator. Have been honored to be a guest on the Drinking Bros a number of times. Have my own podcast, The Prevailing Narrative, focuses on current events, politics, social issues, cultural stuff, and definitely was focused a lot this year on LA politics because we had a number of really significant elections that just passed. So that drops nearly every Thursday, available everywhere you get your podcasts, and that's what I'm up to.
Did you mention the name? It's The Prevailing Narrative is the name of the show. I don't know if you mentioned that or not. But it's a good show for people that are looking to get caught up on current events and things like that from that perspective. Now, LA has been a shit show for a while. Up until around 2015, it was, a really fun place to live and work.
Yep.
And not so much now. Can you run me through what you think has happened there?
Sure. Just to give it in a little historical perspective, like most big cities in America, LA was a pretty dangerous place in the 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s. And then in the early 90s, everybody had kind of had enough and realized that we need to take a different approach towards public safety, law enforcement, homelessness, and that along with some advancements in the economy. America's big cities like LA started to magically get safer and clear up. And you see every graph about violent crime and the murder rate in these big cities. And starting in around 1993, 94, they start to plummet. They keep on plummeting for at least another 15, 20 years. Then sometime around the middle of the last decade, everybody seems to get tired of what's working. I mean, LA, which in 2013 was had the lowest crime rate for violent crime of any city of 2 million residents or more, passes something called Prop 47, which was titled, I believe, the Safe Home and Schools initiative or something along those lines. But it was nothing of the sort. It was it was a fabricated name, and it was really about reducing criminal punishment for a number of smaller crimes, releasing a number of inmates from prison, and it was probably, I wouldn't say it's entirely the cause of a creep back of an uptick in crime and homelessness in LA, but certainly one of the causes and kind of a signal that LA was no longer taking these problems seriously. And then instead of prioritizing public safety and clean streets, was prioritizing fanciful notions of a more just criminal justice system, which really just meant punishing criminals less. Homelessness started to tick back up. A number of other referendums and initiatives were about, an inability to regulate public space until LA had apparently built enough houses and nice little condos and townhouses to house all homeless people that, you cannot prevent people from public camping until you can offer them good housing, and they continue to not build that housing. So over the past 7 years, crime, particularly petty crime, and then also violent crime and homelessness has just exploded. I mean, while it's ticked down in the rest of the country, it's gone up something like 400% in Los Angeles, and nobody seems to be able to solve it. In 2016, once as it was initially noticed, right, 2014, 15, oh wait, all of a sudden we have homeless problems again. 2016, they passed something called Measure 3H, which was the taxpayer saying, okay, we will dedicate $1.2 billion to go solve this homelessness problem that just has reappeared. That $1.2 billion was incinerated. They've built maybe 1,000 units. The project went nowhere, and essentially the public officials here have shown themselves incapable to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. And based on our recent elections, nobody seems to want to take corrective action.
Yeah, it's like our boy Schellenberger is pretty good on this issue. He's been running around in that lane for about 10 to 15 years now.
Yeah,
And it wasn't just LA. Salt Lake City tried the same thing, the Housing First initiative,
yeah,
without any stipulation. What Schellenberger and his team has found is fucking common sense, right? That
100%.
just giving somebody a house isn't going to cut it. You give them a house and you make the housing predicated on their behavior in one way or another,
Absolutely.
right?
It has
Which,
to be conditional.
yeah, but it's like that's basic human intelligence would tell you that is the proper solution to that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the hallmark of modern Western politics is the obfuscation of reality for this. I mean, we've lost in the public sphere, we've lost the is ought fallacy, right? Like it's people refuse to accept the world as it is and
Yep.
demand that we all behave as if it is the way it ought to be. And that's just not how life works.
Yeah. Yeah. And Schellenberger he has a more precise explanation because he gets into and he's got experience with these recovery programs and the mechanisms that the Europeans use. But just as generally in principle, it's an understanding that the priority is to regulate public spaces so they're safe and clean for tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. And then to the extent that the people who have dropped out that are unable to support themselves and not upholding their responsibility, to the extent they should be offered assistance. But if they don't take that assistance, and that assistance needs to be conditioned upon certain things like entering drug rehab programs and things of that nature, and that if they don't take the help that's offered them, then there needs to be some sort of punishment, right?
Sure, yeah.
Because either you're prioritizing their well-being or the well-being of the citizens who want to utilize these public spaces. And an attempt should be made to balance that. But
Sure.
once the attempt is made to balance those interests and those who are derelict in their responsibilities, not taking the assistance the state offers them, they have to go to jail.
Yeah.
That is a reality of the situation.
And also
yet,
lose the benefit that they're being provided conditionally on their participation in human society, right? I mean, it's like it is simply not on everybody else to drag your fucking loser ass through life. And I don't mean like it sounds coarse to say that, but that's the reality of the situation. Like the fundamentals of society are that the weight of all this is extreme, and we all have to lift a little bit. Otherwise, you fuck somebody else. Like it's. I kind of equate it to the Navy SEAL log drill you'll see in buds, where there's there's a several 100-pound log, and dudes are pressing it over their head. And if you're one of the guys that's going to take that turn off, then you just put all that weight onto your buddy's shoulder. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what they're driving home in that exercise.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's basic social contract, right?
Yeah.
Every person who exists in a society enters into the social contract. And one of their obligations under that social contract is you cannot harm others. And if you are allowing yourself to fall into conditions and circumstances that increase the likelihood you might harm others, even if, maybe deep down, that's not your motive, for instance, drunk driving or being a person who descends into drug addiction on the street and psychosis, like the person who stabbed a mother and their child at a Target downtown in Los Angeles the other day. You need to then you've broken the social contract and you need to be punished for it. And right now in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and it seems not as much in New York, they seem to be a little more attuned to reality. In LA, they're not willing to punish the people for breaking that social contract.
Sure,
because apparently we need to provide them a nice condo before we can enforce it.
Yeah. I mean, but it operates from this this obsession leftists have with Foucault that any negative action by a human being is somehow stems from the weight of society on them and not just their individual fucking ability to make a decision on whether or not they're going to walk into a Walmart and stab two people, for example.
Yeah. I mean, they like to call it the trendy term is root causes, and root causes is simply any potential inequality or supposed injustice that's on the basis of, okay, sorry, not everybody is Brad Pitt and is a rich movie star with financial security who flies around the world and lives in big houses. Any circumstance for a person that falls short of that can then be identified as a quote unquote root cause, which somehow justifies their behavior and excuses them and essentially waives society, thinking about this a little bit like a lawyer, but
Sure, yeah.
waives their breach, right? It waives the default. They've defaulted under the social contract, but we are waiving our right to enforce the
But
social
aren't
contract.
we having a conversation about, like, when you're apologizing for something and you say, "Here's the reason I did this. I understand it's not an acceptable excuse," right? That we're having that dialogue right now. Like, I understand that life being against you in a lot of ways may have affected your behavior, but now you and I are having a conversation about it.
Mhm.
You are consciously aware of that, and it is
Mhm.
upon you to make a decision to get out of that shit. It's like,
Yeah.
what the fuck, man? Like, you
Yeah.
would never, if you were in a relationship, whether it's a friendship, business partnership, or like with a partner,
Mhm.
husband or wife or whatever the fuck, you would never, you could never get away with continuously using that as an excuse. You couldn't turn your reason that's not an excuse into an excuse over time and have that be acceptable. That's not how that works.
Absolutely not.
So
Yeah.
we
And,
see we see a lot of these communities, yours included, LA, I mean,
mhm.
who just refuse to get on board with this stuff. You know what I mean? They refuse to get on board. And then there are communities, nihilistic communities,
Yeah.
inner city gangs, Midwestern fucking middle class white kids that want to shoot up public locations,
Mhm.
terrorists. It's all nihilism, right? It just springs forth from the same shit.
Well, it always gets back to nihilism, right? Even if a lot of these people who are, they want to claim something more akin to traditional socialism, and you hear all their terminology and they float it out about community power, workers' rights, and whatnot. But it always descends into nihilism because they won't. It equates to not enforcing that social
Mm-hmm.
contract because you can just any harm that a criminal brings upon somebody can be justified by their
Sure.
circumstances,
Yeah.
right? And you spin that wheel enough times, that could happen once, and someone could claim mental illness, or they're not fit to stand trial, and okay, I'm not going to get. But you spin that wheel enough times,
Mm.
and it descends into nihilism. And one of the things that they do is mischaracterize. Their argument, their narrative is that the people that commit crime are doing so as some. They think it's Les Mis. They try to paint it as Les Mis, that it's
Mm.
somebody who, if not without stealing that loaf of bread, would starve. But it's not. It's people who are lower on the socioeconomic totem pole and want to ascend and want to skip steps. Okay, it is these gangs that when they are. Hey, I'm not pretending that I grew up in as difficult circumstances as they
Mm.
are. They absolutely grew up in more difficult circumstances than I did. However, they have a choice to either go grind it out, try to deal with a tough school environment, get good enough grades to get into a college, and maybe go get a job that sucks that they might make start off at $47,000 a year and have to work their way up and be a wage earner, but be a law abiding citizen. Unfortunately, they look on Instagram, see other people who are, have the trappings of more socioeconomic success, and instead of going and grinding it out and living a less glamorous lifestyle, figure they can go rob someone's, they can go hold someone up, carjack their Bugatti, sell it, and then leapfrog a few steps.
Yeah, but
And
the
that's
previous generations of these communities didn't think this way, right? So it's not like poor people have. There's always been a link between poverty and crime.
Mhm.
There's always been a link between fatherless homes and crime,
Mhm.
but in the larger communities, we didn't necessarily. So, like, here's an example: the left was really active in going after the affluenza bullshit excuse. Like, people, a
Mhm.
dude, like guys in high school or college would date rape somebody, and be like, oh, he grew up rich. What, he doesn't know any better. And this is just
Mhm.
this is just the inverse of it, right? It's a total bullshit excuse. That
Yeah.
the black people that served in World War II didn't think this way. Not even close, right?
Sure. Well, okay. That's interesting to track it timeline wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In the 40s and 50s, man, America, I mean, people don't realize how safe America used to
Mm-hmm.
be in the 40s, up until the early 60s. And then people also forget how dangerous it was in the 70s and
Mm-hmm.
80s. That's a big problem is that I'm the last generation. I'm 41. Once you get maybe 2, 3 years past me, everybody under about 38 does not remember how dangerous LA was in the 70s and
Mm.
80s, unless we had to learn our lesson in that it's not necessarily that there weren't poor people who thought this way. It's that the system, the law, the justice system, and polite society
Mm.
understood that okay, that needs to be punished. It's
Sure.
not.
So that's kind of where I'm going with the affluenza statement. That's a
Yeah,
good observation. We're not doing people any favors by removing the guardrails that build society. You know what I mean? It just
correct.
That's a really stupid thing to do. And I want to turn it back towards politics a little bit because you're right. When people grow up in shitty circumstances, I was one of them, by the way. I grew up in a pretty shitty circumstance. You can grind it out, but what are we doing to help them? From a political standpoint, the Democrats have basically just led these people around by the nose, promised them this, promised them that, given them a little taste of welfare here and there, but no real upward mobility and no strategy to get out. I feel like the conservative side, economically at least, has the right kind of thinking and tools to benefit a community like that, especially now that we're in a creator economy. I mean, you don't have to you can go out and steal a $25,000 purse, but you can create some really interesting content or products and make way more fucking money than that from the comfort of your own
Absolutely.
home. So I wonder what this isn't me capitulating and saying we need to go fucking do away with the rules and stuff. I don't believe that. That's nonsense. But
Mhm.
we have solved a lot of public safety problems. And what was left in the wreckage, we didn't really do much to deal with that. It's very similar to me to what happened with U.S. involvement in Afghanistan the first time. We rooted out Soviet influence, but instead of helping westernize the country, which they were on board with, right? We fucked off and let the Taliban come in and start running the show. And the ultimate result of that was fanaticism rooted in the same kind of nihilism of hard living that you see in other places. And it led to widespread transnational terrorism. I see as an analog to what happened in LA and other cities. If this were like a triage situation, the first thing I do is go in and stop the violence, right? I'm talking about like a combat situation. I stop the violence. Then I decide who needs the most help and at what rate, stop the bleeding, and the immediate trauma, then start exfilling people and then start treating. There's a process for all this stuff. We never did this in our inner cities in a real way. And it's probably because culturally speaking, the groups of people we're talking about leaned towards the Democratic side, and they made a conscious decision just to profit off of that, whether it be financially or profit by getting their vote. And conservatives never really seemed to make a concerted effort to go into inner cities and say, hey, you know what? We hate the government too. They're full of shit. Here's some tools you can use to make your fucking community better, make your own life better. I just never saw that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of conservatives that do have what a healthier and more effective philosophy towards lifting yourself up by the bootstraps have been unwilling to have the patience to package it in a way that makes sense for a lot of inner city communities.
Or maybe we don't have the tools to do it, right? I don't know. I don't know the answer to it. Like maybe we don't have the Rosetta Stone to translate one thing to the other.
Possibly, but also I think, and that's why the Donald Trump phenomenon was a double-edged sword, because his rapport and his style and his symbolism and that of his followers is such a turnoff, and they're so married to it, right? And that a lot of this hokey, and what you're saying, and I think you were about to say, listen, I'm not a libertarian, right? This libertarianism of you need to remove all government involvement, and all rules, period.
Yeah.
Is just another version of
No.
so that
Yeah. If you want to do that, move to Somalia. I don't have that's a ridiculous
Exactly.
fantasy.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think that the message of economic self-reliance can be made to a lot of these people, but if you make it in a condescending way, or if you package it with the American flag in your bio and this and that, the message is not going to get through. And it seems that some Republicans and conservatives are making a little headway with this amongst Hispanic communities. And they're packaging it around just listen. You're a small business owner. Do you want lower taxes? Do you want safety? I mean, and Rick Caruso out here, Rick did very well with Hispanics,
Mm,
right? He went into the community, and I mean, I think and he's not a flamethrower. He's not a Donald Trump Jr. obnoxious troll. Okay, he was patient. He's a good communicator, and he went and met with small business owners, and he said, "Hey, I was once a small business owner. Now I'm a big business owner, and here's what I can offer you. Here's why I'm a better choice." And I think that's right there for someone to grab, right?
yeah.
I mean, also someone to think it. I think DeSantis is doing that in Florida, and then you've got a some of the a Carrie Lake in her style and her enjoyment of trolling the libs.
Mm.
That's not going over.
No,
It's not
that's
land.
it's so stupid. It's like, do you want? And I've said this. This is the same argument I made during Occupy Wall Street. I had a group. I've always had a very wide-ranging political group of friends,
Mhm.
because it's I'm interested in politics, and if you're really interested in something and you just do one version of it, then you're not really interested in it. You're just a fucking idiot,
Sure.
in my opinion. But,
Sure.
um, I would say like, hey, standing in the middle of the street and blocking traffic isn't getting people on your side. It's just
Nope.
not going to work.
Mm-mm.
So what makes you think that like you're prioritizing winning this battle over winning the war? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to tell you, disabuse you of your right to protest how you want or whatever. But I believe in your cause and I think you should win. And here's how you can win. But it always read. I mean, I looked like I was at January 6th. You know what I mean? So it kind of reads
Sure.
that way. It's difficult for somebody like me to communicate with certain groups of people, especially not black people, by the way. I grew up in an
Mhm.
all black neighborhood. I can talk to black people anytime, but the white the
I
white
think you have
liberals,
those skills, but you speak in a sophisticated manner. I'm not saying that so we can sit here and flagellate each other, but
mm,
legitimately, if people, regardless of what you look like, if people hear that you're speaking about it in a way that you're thinking about it,
mm,
that you're not doing the trying to own the other side version, because
yeah,
people are so used to hearing own the libs or own the conservatives version, right? The meme culture, Trump Jr. like embracing of just trying to piss off the other
mm,
side. Once someone hears someone explain a contrary point of view in a manner where they actually see that the other person is thinking, even if they don't agree with it, they're far more receptive to it.
sure, yeah. And I swear a lot too on purpose when I'm talking about it, to be honest, because I think it kind of uh, it breaks some of the pretension that you see in Washington, and you're hearing a lot of this condescension again from the left. It's happened the last two elections. So in
Yeah.
2020, it was that black people can't figure out how to get attorneys or driver's licenses or register to vote, and now it's Hispanics across the country have gotten duped by conservatives. Like, no. They're human beings that know exactly what the fuck they're doing. They don't want their kids getting taught weird shit in school. They don't want their fucking border communities getting overrun by illegal criminals all the
Mm-hmm.
time. Yeah, it's just like it seems like the actual institutional racism and condescension all comes from the left these days, which is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's an inversion. I think I'm sure you've identified. It's an inversion of a prior period in so many different ways. On that, in terms of condescending to minorities, and also in terms of free speech and an embrace of
Mm,
cultural reverence, right? And that the rebellious culture used to be uniformly from the left. I
mm,
mean, the beleaguered or irreverent comedians were all left wing. Now they're all right wing.
mm.
I mean, the insufferable Karens used to be the conservative movement and the moral majority. Now it's the woke DIE complex, right? I mean, this is the strangest, bizarro world of all time. I mean, I think an apt analogy is the movie Animal House, right? In Animal House, the stuffy, conservative, suffocating community was the conservative right wing type fraternity, right? Where at the end they said that one of the leaders of it ended up being a Nixon aide, the other one
Yeah,
was like a
yeah,
fascist military, right? And the fun-loving libertine types were more liberal. That would be a complete inversion now. The
sure.
stuff you Karen Hall monitors are all the liberals. So that's a complete inversion. And yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing this weird realignment where definitely the Hispanic community is gravitating towards the Republicans because they feel that because they're telling the Democrats are telling them those rational observations of reality you're making are actually false. And no, this is all you're fantasizing about crime or business overregulation or border security. And no, you just don't know any better. And that's driving them towards the Republicans.
What
Then
do you,
you've got
yeah, keep
yeah,
going.
you've got these college educated or grad school
Mm.
educated white people in the suburbs that are ignoring some of those problems too, but now out of a desire to socially signal that, hey, I'm an evolved, sophisticated, smart person, I now have to vote Democrat because the Republicans are a little too icky, working class, unsophisticated knuckle draggers for me.
Sure. And what do you think? I mean, for me, this is, I'm trying to track inversions happen in American politics all the time. I mean, from the Monroe Doctrine was primarily a conservative issue. Just like we're gonna be hegemons of North America and not really fuck around anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the left took us to war. Actually, to be fair, Democratic politicians have declared every major war of the 20th century, which is an interesting
I
little.
don't know about what about Iraq?
That was the
That was
21st. But
21st,
yeah,
correct?
but
Yeah, no,
every one of the 20th century. With that's what I was going to get to.
yeah.
Then George W. Bush runs on not nation building and immediately starts nation building, right? So we've seen these inversions in our lifetime. We've seen another one sometime. I guess it was in the early 2010s is when it really started on the political scale. I wonder it makes me wonder what the moralizing of the future is going to be from the left once they're the party of the majority white middle class and college educated people, and then minorities are all trending conservative, because that's what's been happening the last two elections. You know what I mean? Like, how much are
Yeah.
they going to be able to lean on the racism thing? How long are they going to be able to tell the Hispanic and black communities that they're not smart enough to make their own political decisions before those communities are like, hey, fuck you, dude?
Yeah. Well, you're seeing it in the Hispanic. It's happening more quickly in the Hispanic community than the African American
Mm,
community. Um, but here's the thing: is that trend a decade ago would have ended up with the slaughterhouse results that people were expecting this election, but it didn't, because those other groups are trending Democratic. Well, a
mm,
variety. We could sit here and identify half a dozen reasons why the Republicans underperformed. It's also the new voting apparatus.
mm.
The Democrats have really embraced and benefited from the new mail-in voting apparatus, and people keep on saying, "Oh, you mean they cheat?" I was like, I don't know. I don't know if they need to cheat. I
Yeah.
think that they can simply take advantage of the new rules that are technically not cheating good enough that they don't have to cheat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's offset the advantage the Republicans are getting from winning, making massive inroads with the Hispanics. So until there's a real smack in the face where the Democrats realize that, oh shit, we lost the Hispanics and we couldn't afford to lose the Hispanics.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna really have a lot of impact if the Republicans get their act together over the next 2 years, and stop just getting dominated in the ballot collect in the apparatus of extended early voting and it being a voting month as opposed to election month as opposed to election day,
Sure.
and mail-in ballots. If the Republicans make some inroads there and maintain the inroads they've made with the Hispanics, like, they could do very well in 2024. Will they? I don't know. But if they do that, then there's going to be that watershed election where everyone acknowledges, oh shit, the Democrats really have driven away the Hispanic vote. The Hispanic vote is significant enough now that makes it difficult for them to win elections, and they've got to wake up. That's a problem that they're going to have to address.
Yeah. You would think that, well, the conservatives have always been pretty bad at winning elections. They're just not, their ground game is not great. I mean, when things are really shitty, like with Carter, yeah, Reagan can come in and beat up on Carter. That's not a big deal. And when
Mm-hmm.
when the Cold War is coming to an end and Reagan's popularity is pretty high, yeah, HW can come in and win pretty well. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. They're not very. To be frank, the 2004 election is the most surprising election of my entire life. I can't believe George W. Bush won
Interesting.
that.
Because
I
here's the thing: I was not, and I was someone who called I was only 22 at the time, but I thought fucking Stevie Wonder can see that this Iraq thing is going to be a disaster.
yeah
I was sitting there, every adult that I knew that somehow cheered on this war. I was like, how fucking blind are you?
yeah
So
yeah
I was neither surprised by how much of a disaster Iraq was, nor was I surprised by George Bush winning re-election, because I saw how many people were blissfully ignorant of how much of a disaster Iraq was going to be.
Do you
I was like,
think it
oh
was?
wow.
Do you think it was blissful ignorance or some confluence of like the military-industrial complex and the spent cost fallacy, where you can't admit that you're wrong now because people have died? You know what I mean? Like
I'm
that's a
sure those I'm sure those factors were at play too, but I guess the way that I saw it at the time was, and listen, once again, I was 22,
mm,
so I didn't have some of the analytical tools that, but I was still able to see this one. Um, I just I couldn't believe that they didn't realize that they were fabricating this, that
mm.
they were lying, and that didn't you guys know that like they've been talking about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction for years now? Like,
Yeah, since
is
Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense 20 years prior. Yeah,
you not kind of see it as suspicious that
yeah,
they're now pretending that this condition that they acknowledged was present for the last 10, 15 years, they're now saying is a life and death matter, which will justify the first act of aggression that I can remember in American history where we initiate an
mm,
armed conflict against someone who didn't attack us.
sure.
It's like you don't see through that. And I was like, oh, these people don't see through this.
Mm.
Oh, they're going to reelect George Bush. This is crazy.
Yeah, I just didn't. I couldn't believe, and I was actually in the process of joining the military at the time. Right,
Yeah, you must have a deep perspective.
I was in the delayed entry program when he got reelected. So
Mm-hmm.
I was months away from actually starting my tour in the Army, and I couldn't believe it. And it would be, I mean, for those of you who are younger, it would be like if we just decided to invade North Korea today. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Without them actually striking us. I mean, what the fuck? That under no circumstances would that be okay for us to do that. But this was
Yeah.
we were on the back end of just having started a war in Afghanistan. Not that we started it, but like starting our conflict in Afghanistan. And we're like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
you know what? Those guys did 9/11 and whatever the fuck. But this dude tried to kill my dad 20 years ago, so
Yeah.
we got to invade him, I guess.
Yeah. And then we roll out incredibly shoddy, half-assed evidence in front of the world to the UN that no serious adult could have thought was actually significant enough to support our claims, and just told everyone, these other countries we were asking to fight alongside us and join our coalition said, I'm sorry, I don't believe you. And they were completely right. And they were completely justified. And our reaction to them was, fuck you, you appeasing, cheese eating surrender monkeys.
Yeah.
I mean, this was complete madness. And I just couldn't believe people were staring at that and not seeing it. It was nuts.
This is like one of the better illustrations for me of how important one individual can be in an administration. Like the attorneys general who quit instead of dropping the case against Nixon, for example. Huge. Essentially threw away their careers just to make sure that the wrong guy didn't stay in power. And Colin Powell walking in front of the UN with that little vial full of nothing was one of the more embarrassing points in American history. And it reminds me of now with the Afghanistan pullout. I mean, it was the same shit. Nobody at the Pentagon had the fucking nuts to stand up and say, hey, you know what we don't do is remove our best strategic airbase in the entire region before we get our fucking people out of here. No matter what you felt about leaving Afghanistan, a private in the Army knows that that's not how you conduct that operation. Any reason, you've never served in the military, that that's fucking stupid. You know what I mean?
Anyone with a triple figure IQ should be able to figure that one out.
So it's like, what would have happened if, because General Milley had a phone call with the president of Afghanistan, and he was like, hey, it looks like you guys are bailing out on Bagram. What's going on? He goes, nah, we'll be there. Don't worry. The next morning, all of our people are gone.
It was a disaster, huh? Just tactically a fucking disaster.
Yeah, it was a total piece of shit. But the point of that is, just like with the attorneys general under Nixon, if any of these guys in the Joint Chiefs or at the Pentagon had just said, hey, Mr. President, what you're doing is wrong. We're not going to go along with this. And fire me if you have to, but I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I don't get caught up in this. The machine's too big for one person to make a difference, because we've seen it make a difference. We've seen under Nixon, one guy, well, two people actually were like, hey, we're not doing this. So fuck off. And it worked. The wrong guy was in office. He got removed. And you don't see that kind of temerity from people in public service anymore. They're not willing to take any kind of personal risk. And I think they moralize it by saying, well, I've got to stay part of the game so I can affect things down the road. Like, no, dude, this is your fucking moment. People's lives are on the line right now. It isn't like your contribution is here and now. And if it's not, then fuck off.
Well, what do you think of, and to that point, what do you think about the following? That essentially now that social media companies are extra extra governmental organizations, essentially they're arms of the governmental apparatus, right? Elon Musk seems to be that one guy.
Yep.
Right. I don't want to, I don't want to get too excited about how the benefits of him owning Twitter might manifest themselves, but I think they're going to manifest themselves.
Sure.
And it seems like that is the one guy who, in the face of this massive Borg, said, okay, no, I don't give a shit. I'm going to go take over this incredibly powerful channel of communication that does influence the world in a variety of ways, and I'm going to mold it I'm going to shape it more in a more healthy manner. And that's going to put me at risk financially in terms of the government coming after him, and certainly in terms of tons of people criticizing me. But he says, I don't really give a shit, and I'm going to do it, and he's doing it. And everyone who's betting against him, I think, is the smart money. The smart money is not on him failing.
No, he hasn't yet. And I don't know. I don't understand why people think he would now. I'm not. Look, we're in a fucking hero worship version, or a hero worship period of human existence, I guess.
Totally.
No one, and maybe it's always been like this because, for the first couple of thousand years of civilization, most people were kept illiterate, so they weren't able to, partake in any of this stuff. It's changed rapidly over the last 100 years or so. Even going back to the printing press, so several hundred years, but especially in the last 100 years. And for a little while, we saw some free thought, and it evaporated almost immediately because ultimately it's just easier to think and speak in sound bites than it is to have long form conversations. It's a big problem that we have as a society. Now, I don't get too wrapped up in any one individual. Elon's got some dealings with China that are extremely suspect. And China is probably the worst country on earth right now. But you know what I mean? DeSantis has his issues as well. I'm sure. I don't know them yet, but I'm sure he does because he's a fucking person. Why would you expect anybody to be perfect up and down? You're not, and especially not, only authoritarians expect other people to believe everything that they do. That's a stupid way to go through life. But he's more than just the classic disruptor. Like, a lot of people are trying to compare him to Trump. And I guess in effect, to some degree, that's accurate. But it's it's not chaos with Elon Musk. Like there's a purpose behind what he's doing. He's not just slapping at the water like a toddler to make fucking bubbles. You know what I mean? He's actually doing stuff.
Yeah. And listen, as you were saying, you got to look at the entire file. Okay. You can't just look at one folder in the file. You look at one folder, and a lot of people love doing this because everybody's so suspicious these days that a lot of people might look at Elon's. I got to deal with this all the time when people try to, oh my God, Tesla's not actually such a revolutionary company. Well, okay. Oh, well, the people who buy the cars still seem to fucking like them. Okay. Yeah. And enough people want to buy the goddamn cars for them to sell a lot of them. So clearly they're doing something right, and they're doing something right that takes more skill than 99.5% of humanity is able to exhibit. Maybe Elon Musk has some is a little too friendly with the Chinese because he needs to fucking sell cars there. Okay, whatever. I'm going to look at the entire file, not just a piece of the file. And I don't see any reason to doubt his sincerity about him thinking that that Twitter became the province of insufferable left-wing authoritarians, and he had the means to go in and clean them out.
Right.
And what you're seeing with a lot of the dissatisfaction and grievances at Twitter, right? Yeah, he went and cleaned house. He fired a bunch of people who had no business being there, weren't adding enough value, and told everybody else, we're now going to hold you to a higher standard. When that happens, things are going to be a little messy for a month or two, maybe even 6 months. Eventually, it's all going to work out, and not even a question. And yeah, while you don't want to hero worship somebody, I do think we have to acknowledge, and this is what a lot of that. Did you follow Adam Townsend on Twitter?
Yeah.
Okay, you follow him. You see how he always says the fastest roll up of power ever. He likes to speak cryptically, and it was a little annoying sometimes because you have to try to figure it out. But I don't think he's wrong there in that a lot of ways we've seen an incredibly fast roll up of power amongst a variety of institutions, even from before COVID. And one of those was social media.
Yep.
And unfortunately, the only way all these individuals out there whining and complaining or criticizing Twitter, nothing was going to change that. The only thing that was going to improve it was someone of Elon's stature and resources coming in and trying to impact this. So, I don't want to put all my hopes and dreams on him, but hey, I think this is going to move the ball in the right direction on social media.
Well, I mean, if the place is flooded and some dude shows up with a fucking water vacuum, you're like, all right, cool.
Bingo.
It's like my hopes and dreams aren't that the building is still going to be intact, but at least we can get some of this water out of here, right? I mean,
correct.
Have a measured expectation for all this stuff. But I wonder from your perspective, because you're on Twitter a lot, how much has your experience changed since he took it over? Because mine hasn't changed all that much, except for not getting fucked with on the censor side. And 11,000, like any other company, if you remove 11,000 people from it, especially a social media company, you would expect the day-to-day operations to change significantly. And the fact that they haven't tells you everything you need to know about those 11,000 people, right?
For sure. Yeah, my experience hasn't changed much, but you see a couple product updates, and this company rolled out one product update every 6 years, and now he's rolled out a half dozen that are pretty significant. And I don't love all of them, but okay, this is tech, dude. People don't get it. You roll out an update, you see if it works or not. It might not work perfectly. You iterate and you improve it. So allowing everybody to purchase a blue check. Thus far, I haven't loved it. I mean, I have one now, but it's a little tougher while I think there was a negative that it gave a lot of people an inflated sense of importance, it also was good to be able to determine if someone was official. And now that's harder to do. You see all these people with blue checks that, bought 1738, with 115 followers, which is annoying. But here you have 30 seconds to edit or pull back your tweet. That's an interesting update. Whether it's going to be improving or hurting the quality of the information that I get through my Twitter feed, it certainly hasn't hurt it. I get a ton of good information, which is like, listen, I think I've probably the only way I've been able to find some success on social media is because I think I follow the right people and thus am able to serve as a switchboard for good information. And yeah, I think the likelihood or the fear, that self-censorship that comes from being concerned about saying a variety of things that are completely fine that you previously could get banned from Twitter for doing, not having to worry about that is nice. Yeah. Absolutely. Being able to say Rachel Levine is a man, I'm sorry, and to express reality, that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder, like people ask me all the time, because we do pretty in-depth breakdowns of news stuff, because it's difficult if you just go straight to one news source or another, chances are you're not getting the whole story. As a matter of fact, you're probably getting snippets from the story just twisted in some kind of weird way to fit some corporate agenda. That's typically how it works. Sure. So people ask me a lot, how do you get your information? I'm like, well, I mean, look at everything and look at it with open eyes and try to look at it from the perspective of the person writing it. So if somebody who's starving to death is explaining a piece of food and they're like, this is the best piece of food I've ever had, and you look at it and you're like, that doesn't look very good to me. Like, all right, cool. It isn't even nefarious what they're doing. They're just explaining shit from there. And this is how critical thinking works. You know what I mean? You have to make yourself do it, because it's easy to just accept things as they are or accept what you're being told. To your point, following the right people in the same space, whether you agree with them or not, is a pretty effective way to discern what's actually happening in the world. And you can't do that if one side or the other is getting censored. And you also can't do it, by the way, if you are self-censoring that person by not looking into what they're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't really do you any favors. It's one of the things I keep telling people recently about the whole woke thing and all of the stupid DEI, intersectional nonsense that comes out of it. Yeah, it's dumb and it's exhausting. But if somebody is complaining that much about stuff, you should pay attention, at least insofar as you have to understand that there is an actual problem there, whatever it happens to be. it might be that they're crazy. It might be that there's certain segments of the population that have a warped sensibility when it comes to communities and how they're to be treated and shit like that. But BLM is a good example. So if a large group of the community feels disenfranchised and that disenfranchisement is leading to nihilism, which is holding our country back and holding communities back, that's something that we need to fucking figure out. We need to deal with it. We don't have to give them $60 million to go buy real estate. That's stupid, right? But we do need to fucking figure it out. And just saying, oh, fuck the libs, I'm not getting involved in this conversation and walking back to your home, throwing your hands up in the air. That doesn't help you or them, right? You're just letting the enemy build an offensive force on the outside of your fucking fortress at that point.
That's true. And this was sorry, I got about 10 more minutes.
Yeah.
This was interesting. Right around the BLM riots in 2020, I interviewed a guy who is a sheriff. He's an African-American sheriff down in Compton, but also a church leader down in Compton. He's the pastor at a church down there. His brother was in the Crips. Anyone who's seen everything that there is from that community, he's seen it. And one of the things he mentioned, and obviously, he's definitely had his criticisms of BLM being a law enforcement officer, but he said one of the reasons that BLM ascended was that the Black community used to be able to look to the church and religious institutions for its civil rights leaders. Think about all the Black civil rights leaders. The vast majority of them had some religious affiliation. And now that the church and religious people from the church were not taking leadership positions, and the Black community in the inner city couldn't look to them for leadership, there created a vacuum, and BLM filled it. And I found that super interesting. And not that I knew how to fill that vacuum better than BLM, although I think that they've shot themselves in the foot and been revealed as frauds from their own behavior. But whatever was going to give them a voice in a more healthy manner than what the microphone that BLM could give them, that seemed to be why that they were turning to BLM, and I found that super interesting. I think it really goes to what you say about it. If you don't offer them something better, they're going to choose something worse.
Sure, yeah, and it's not just the Black community or BLM that you see that in. It's activism in general has become we've lost religion as a culture here in America for the most part. I'm not religious. I don't believe in any of that shit. But you would be a fool not to recognize that the sense of community, the equity that you feel in your community because you all have a shared belief. It doesn't have to be in God. We can have a shared belief in, hey, we're going to be the best goddamn country we can be. That's a much better way to think about it than we're all pitted against each other and it's my conservatism versus your progressivism. That's not how it works. Yeah. These conservatism and progressivism are like gravity and nuclear fission that keep a star together, right? That's how it's supposed to work. The gravity presses down on it and the fission pushes out and it creates a fucking symbiosis. How can we not figure that out? Like this, everything in nature works that way, from the very largest things we understand to the very smallest things we understand. And in society, we just can't fucking figure it out.
Yeah, we really do not have many unifying forces right now. And that's a problem. And I'm searching for what's on the horizon that might be unifying, and I'm just not seeing it. But the church and religion was, for all its faults, was a unifying force and was a grounding force for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who, everybody tries to analyze things only amongst the most capable. There are a lot of people who weren't as capable, who, they might have believed in some, hokey religious stuff and done some eye-rolling stuff in furtherance of that. But religion and the church or religious institutions were a grounding force for them and probably curbed some of their worst instincts. And that we don't have that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if you reduce these things, they're really about recognizing that the purpose of human existence is to find and exercise your purpose, whatever it happens to be. And create some kind of something, whether it's an organization or a cause or something else that captures that in a way that's positive for society, right? That's what religion was for a very long time. It's what, the idea of charity, for example, for a very long time. I'm not sure what it is right now either, but it seems like if you get a libertarian and a conservative and a progressive in a room together and ask them questions about the government, chances are you're going to get some really similar answers. Like we don't like people having control over what we're doing, whether it's my body because of vaccines or my body because of abortion. Those are two similar arguments to me. Like I hear two people arguing about those two things, and like you're saying the same shit. Like the elements and the debate are different, but you're intimating the same idea, which is that I don't want other people telling me what to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we could probably have another hour conversation about the abortion issue, but in that case, you do have another, and where the at what point it becomes another human life, there is another human life involved there. So I think
Sure,
that's a
yeah.
distinguishing factor. But yeah, I see. You're trying to judge. We're trying to come up with an informed, sensible definition of when that goes from it just affecting your life to that affecting your life and the child. So
Sure,
it's like,
yeah.
okay, where do we figure that out? Where do we
Yeah.
draw that line?
Yeah, for sure.
That's-
Well, here, this might be a better example then. Uh, Foreign policy. Not a lot of left-leaning people were thrilled about Iraq. Not a lot of right-leaning people were thrilled about Ukraine. And frankly, earlier in the week, after the Ukrainian fired ordnance hit Poland, that's what really happened. My back channel contacts said NATO and White House are pushing hard to deploy an infantry brigade into Ukraine, which would be an act of war. That would be declaring war on Russia. And luckily, people at the Pentagon behind the scenes shut them down. But it just shows like it does, like the facts of the case aren't always what determine what side people are on. That's very confusing. You know what I mean? It's not like we're anti-war, so we don't want to get involved in this. It's like, oh, our people say it's okay, so we're gonna support it. You know what I mean? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
it's got some aspects of the Iraq thing with the hysteria, right?
Yeah.
It's like when there's the public wind is sweeping in one direction, it carries a lot of people, and it carried a lot of people who should have known better on Iraq. And this carries a lot of people on a lot of stuff, and particularly on the Ukraine, where everybody wants to be part of the movement that seems like it's on the side of the righteous, and then you want to tell them to calm down and say, like, listen, I get it. Maybe this is the side of the righteous, but when you play this out to this logical conclusion, and it results in A, B, C, D, and E action, do you really think that's worth it? Do you think that's going to lead us to a smart place? Similarly about, hey, Saddam Hussein's a bad guy. Well, yeah, thanks. That's a brilliant, deep insight. However, fomenting a war under false pretenses and going and trying to rebuild that country may not be the best idea.
The money it cost us, the lives it cost us, but also the respect on the international stage. Like,
who took us seriously after that?
No,
I didn't take it seriously.
Certainly not. It's a good point. So this whole I support the current thing that conservatives like to make fun of these days. Most of you were guilty of that just a few years ago. Just try and keep that in mind. Tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find the show. I know you got to get out of here.
Yeah, no problem. So mostly on Twitter and Instagram at Matt Bilinsky, MattBilinsky. Podcast is The Prevailing Narrative, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, wherever you find your podcasts. And
Sweet. Well, I appreciate you coming on today, man. Great conversation as always, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
No doubt. I'll make it out to Austin sometime soon, and we'll find a time for you to come on mine.
Oh yeah, for sure, buddy. All right. Thanks again for coming. Thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.